15 life realities about living in Alaska. Alaska is a place that I've always had like a real interest in. I really want to visit someday because I feel like every movie or TV show where there's a character who wants to start a new life, you know, they've done something bad, they're trying to, I'm thinking of Breaking Bad, you know, Jesse Pinkman, they always seem to end up in Alaska, like, because it's huge. I think it's fairly sparsely populated, but what's it actually like there? You know, what's the, you know, do you have all the benefits you do living in mainland USA, or is life totally different?
Alaska. In the modern world, it truly is the last frontier. A place so amazing, it's riddled with myths and misconceptions. But one thing is for sure, you are either gonna love it or hate it here.
Yeah, a bit like Marmite, right?
We are Ben and Rebecca of Outliers Overland, coming to you today from our home base in Seward, Alaska. Welcome to 15 Things You Need to Know Before You Move to Alaska.
It just literally looks like, you know, there's nobody there. Like, I know that there's people there, but like these shots here where it's just like wide open spaces, it just looks like empty.
The purpose of this video is to share things that you might want to consider before making any big commitments, such as moving your whole household up here or accepting a job offer.
COVID has us stuck between adventures right now, and we thought what better time to create a video series about life in Alaska. It's probably safe to say that we're qualified because we've lived here since 2008.
There is so much to address. We're making this a 3-part series. The things we love about living in Alaska, the things we hate about living in Alaska, and this one covering the things you need to know before moving to Alaska.
Before we get started, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you can check out all 3 videos.
I feel like, you know, based on what we've seen so far, you've got to be quite outdoorsy to do well living in Alaska. It seems like you need to be, you know, you need to know how to survive and like live a bit more of a off the grid type lifestyle. Is that accurate, you think?
The objective is to share with you real life insight about living in our amazing state.
So let's have some fun and jump into the list. Number 1, Alaska is the largest state in the US of A.
Yeah.
Why is this so important, you might ask? Well, because you need to comprehend exactly how big Alaska is and how long it takes to...
I mean, wow. Literally like as far as the eye can see, it's just like, almost looks like farmland or just like, you know, just fields.
Get to places. For example, if you are going to move to Fairbanks and have a cousin who lives in Homer, you're not going to be exactly neighbors. In reality, you're looking at about a 600-mile drive.
Yeah, if you laid Alaska over a map of the lower 48, it would stretch from North Dakota to Texas and California to Florida. And I'm sorry, Texas.
Gosh, hold on a minute. Let's go back here. That is nuts. So basically, Alaska looks almost like 25% of the entire like mainland USA. That's nuts.
California to Florida. And I'm sorry, Texas, Alaska is twice the size of your cute little state.
Despite being so large, it's actually a really small state in terms of community. And that's one of the most endearing qualities of
When she said small, I was thinking, small how?
about it.
All right, moving on to number 2, and I think most everybody has heard this line, Alaska pays you to live here.
That's a rather simplified way of saying it, but pretty much true. What they're actually referring to is the PFD, or Permanent Fund Dividend. Commonly perceived as oil money, in reality, it's dividends from the investments made with oil taxation money.
Now, the annual PFD is direct deposited every October, and in our tenure, it can actually range from $1,000 to over $2,400.
I mean, that's not bad. Like $2,400, that will pay for Christmas presents. That'll pay for Thanksgiving, Halloween.
Keep in mind, that's per person in your household, including children. Now, you
Including
do have to
kids.
pay taxes on it, so expect to receive a 1099 each year.
Why do you have to pay taxes on it, though?
You do need to live here one full calendar year before qualifying, and then spend at least 6 months and 1 day of each year thereafter in state in order to requalify.
And you have to be honest. With our extended travels, we do not always qualify for the PFD, but when we do, it is a very welcomed chunk of change.
Now moving
Yeah,
on to
100%.
number 3, another misconception.
Are there any other states in America that have a similar kind of fund where every year you get, a nice little check? I probably don't think so. Maybe somewhere like Montana? Probably not. Like other oil-rich states.
Alaska does not
Texas.
have any taxes.
Okay, now this one is both true and false. The true part is that there is no state income tax in Alaska and
Right.
no state sales tax in Alaska.
The false part comes into play with sales taxes put into effect by boroughs and municipalities. Our hometown of Seward is a perfect example. We have a 7% sales tax. 3% goes to the Kenai Peninsula Borough, and 4% goes to the city of Seward. There's also an additional 4% bed tax for lodging businesses. So a lodging accommodation totals up to 11% sales tax.
Right.
Another good case would be the municipality of Anchorage.
But it sounds like to me, you're still gonna, if you were living in Alaska versus living in California, you're gonna be paying way less tax on your income, even with the additional lodging and other taxes that he mentioned. You're still gonna make good savings.
They do not have sales tax, which is very helpful when you make those supply runs to town, and you also never leave Anchorage without a full tank of fuel.
That brings us up to number 4. Alaska pays off your school loans if you move here.
Now this one
What?
is very true, and some of those
Holy.
jobs will even offer relocation fees. The kicker is that you usually have to work in underserved areas, and a lot of times that involves helping the Alaska Native population. The most common jobs that qualify are in healthcare and teaching.
So is it that if you move to Alaska with student debt, they'll pay off that debt? Or if you live in Alaska and then go to college there, they'll pay your student loans for you? Like, how does it work exactly?
We actually did this when we moved to Alaska. I'm a PA by trade, had just finished graduate school, and carried a big honkin' chunk of school debt to go with it. So we moved to Alaska. You get either an IHS or a HRSA grant to pay off your school loans to your
Wow.
commitment to whichever organization you work with. And they do tax you on the money. So think about that when you look at dollar amounts. They're different with each organization.
What do you mean they tax you? So like, let's say you've got $50,000 worth of student debt, and then you get the grant that, the $50,000 of grant to pay off your debt. You have to pay taxes on the $50,000 so you don't actually have 50K? That doesn't really make sense.
But it has been an amazing experience for you.
Totally was a fantastic experience and led to all sorts of avenues opening up in my career, and also put us ahead financially because it paid off almost half of my school debt in those 2 years.
Now this segues in perfectly to number 5, that there are amazing job experiences in Alaska, and it's also an excellent time to share a little bit more of our story.
Yes, we had a dream, and this was not a spur-of-the-moment decision. It took time to prepare. I, as I mentioned earlier, am a physician assistant. Right out of grad school, got a job up here with the Native Corporation, practicing medicine here in Seward. That also included flying out to remote villages. Ben had spent 10 years working for Ford dealerships, but had always wanted to be a professional fisherman.
Wow,
So he
look
became a
at
U.S.
that.
Coast
What kind of fish was that? I don't know. It kind of looks a bit like a marlin with the flatness of it. No, I don't even know actually. I have no idea.
He became a
What
U.S.
kind of fish
Coast
is
Guard
that?
merchant marine boat captain and fishing guide.
We also have friends in Alaska who are expedition leaders for wilderness lodges. Some work with the animals at the Alaska Sea Life Center. Others work for the oil industry up on the North Slope. Then we have neighbors that have commercial fishing boats. They'll work for the utility companies, and a handful of them are also in healthcare like Rebecca was.
Bottom line, if you're looking to do something out of the ordinary or really make a difference, this might be the right place for you to be.
I really hope they talk about the cost of living though, because so far, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of perks to moving to Alaska. They'll pay off your student loans. You know, getting a job sounds fairly easy if you're in the right sort of fields like medicine and stuff.
And number 6, you may not be making a difference, but there's the myth that you can make a fortune working for the oil companies. Now, maybe in the 70s or 80s, the word fortune might have been accurate, but in present day, I would call it true because you can earn a good living working for the oil companies.
Since the discovery of the Prudhoe Bay oil patch, it's been big business here in Alaska. The Alaska Pipeline runs about 900 miles from Dead Horse, Alaska to Valdez.
Wow,
and it's not just
miles.
Alaskans that work for the oil companies. People come from all across the country to work variations of a 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off rotating schedule.
This issue tends to be a bit of a double-edged sword because, let's be honest, the oil companies don't always have Alaska's best interest at heart. They tend to care the most about their bottom line, hold loyalty to their shareholders, and unfortunately, they're pretty embedded in our government and political system here.
So let's jump into number 7.
But yeah, look, for sure, the oil company is going to care about the profits, but that's what pays for that PFD thing, the dividend, which, sounds like a nice perk to get. So, on the one hand, like if you like the PFD, you kind of need to work with the oil companies and let them pump the oil. But yeah, I can see why oil companies don't have the best reputation.
And talk a little bit more about lifestyle instead of jobs. But Alaska is a great place to live in a cabin.
It is pretty easy and relatively affordable to buy or rent a cabin in Alaska. But despite what reality TV shows share, not everyone lives this way.
Yeah, cabins come in a wide variety of styles and modern options. You can have a cistern for capturing rainwater or drill a well. If you're near the power grid, you can run electricity, but solar, wind, and generators may also be used.
I really want to see more of the capital and the other cities in Alaska. Like, I'm sure they must have like a big city. I think it's Juneau with a downtown where there's like, cool bars and restaurants. Because like whenever I think of Alaska, I just think of like a tiny cabin like this, somebody literally like hunting for their food. I just have this really sort of basic idea of how people live there, which is definitely not accurate.
Composting toilets offer a sustainable and warmer alternative to the long drop.
So if you're not too worried about having cell phone service or electricity, and you like the idea of hauling your own wood and water, pooping in an outhouse, and living off the land, you probably found the right place.
And that segues nicely into number 8, because it is realistic to live off of the land in Alaska.
Yeah, off-grid.
Some things like produce in the middle of winter may be problematic, but other than that, it's very manageable.
In a way, Alaska is a homesteader's paradise. You've got hunting for big game to provide red meat, spruce grouse and ducks cover poultry, the ocean almost always has fish to be caught, and when the salmon are in the rivers, it's game on.
You can also grow an amazing garden in the summer months. What you can grow is actually highly dependent on your location, but if you learn the craft of preserving, you can make that harvest last all winter.
The forest is also a very bountiful place. You've got foraging for mushrooms, berry picking satisfies the sweet tooth, we have spruce tips with enough vitamin C to prevent scurvy, and things like chaga and devil's club treat a wide range of ailments.
I wonder if it's actually possible to live completely off the grid in Alaska. Like, it must be. Like when I say off the grid, I mean completely self-sufficient. Like you don't rely on anybody but yourself. You hunt your own food, you know, you get your own water, like you install like maybe a battery and a solar panel for like electricity. Like, is it possible to do that?
And the list goes on and on, so I think you get the point. But if all else fails, you can rely on the Alaskan staple called pilot bread.
Pilot bread.
And that carries us into
What's
number
that?
9. Everybody in Alaska is packing heat. Per capita basis, this is definitely
Yeah,
true.
yeah.
Alaskans
I've heard
own
this
more
one.
guns than people in the lower 48.
Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that everyone is armed, especially when it comes to the highly populated urban areas of Alaska, such as Anchorage. But overall, a shockingly high number of people possess firearms.
Most ownership roots to the living off of the land mindset. And you have to assume that everyone here is armed because
I guess it makes sense because if there's a chance you can run into a polar bear or like a grizzly bear, you know, it makes sense to have something to defend yourself with because, you know, bear spray, yeah, it might work, but you've got to get quite close to the bear. And if you miss, grrr, like it's not gonna...
because a permit is not necessary to carry a concealed weapon. And this may be an extreme example, but in Alaska, you could be pulled over for speeding, have a loaded pistol and a bag of weed on the dash, and only get a speeding ticket.
Wow.
Essentially, what you need to realize is that Alaskans highly value their civil liberties and freedoms.
So this takes us into number 10, which I hinted at just a moment ago. Weed is legal in Alaska.
Oh.
Now, for decades, at some level, it has been legal and loosely tolerated by law enforcement. But times they are a-changing, and like all of the western states and Canadian provinces, it is now considered recreational.
I mean, it just makes sense because you like the black market, you deal with that. Like you generate tax income, which can go towards things that the state needs. You know, I think legalization also lowers crime, doesn't it, right?
Just do not go crossing international borders because things are different on a federal level and everyone wants their share of the tax revenue.
Number 11 is a little nugget of truth. You are not guaranteed to see the aurora appear. And having said that, there's a few things to understand about the aurora borealis.
Yeah, firstly, it is present year-round. There's just so much sunlight in the summer months that you cannot see it. And then, in the winter months, if you're in the urban areas, there's light pollution. So keep that in mind if you're going on an aurora hunt.
So, I mean, do you have to leave it till like when it's like obviously nighttime, certain times of the year? Fair enough. I mean, I would do that just to like the aurora borealis, you know, spectacular. Those green lights, it's so cool.
The aurora is caused by solar flares. And those solar flares actually happen in a 5-year high to low cycle. Because of this, auroras can actually be predicted a few days in advance because it takes those solar flares that long to reach our atmosphere. If you're interested in this, just Google it. It's a pretty cool topic to read about.
And lastly, the aurora will never look as good.
Wow. I mean, this looks crazy. Imagine being someone, you know, 200-300 years ago and seeing this. You would be like, yeah, this is like God. You would think like this is, you know, God or something like that.
To your naked eye, as it does when you're looking at somebody's photograph. That's because of exposure times. They just make the colors pop.
Next up, number 12. It's light all summer and dark all winter, which is kind of true, but kind of not true. And most of it depends on where you're located in the state.
Now, to thoroughly comprehend this, you need to know that summer solstice, the longest day of the year, is on June 21st. And winter solstice, the shortest day of the year, is on December 21st.
Being at such high latitudes like Alaska is, you're always going to have a high rate of change. The days are noticeably getting longer or shorter, sometimes by as much as 7 minutes per day.
Man, driving in on this road, like even with this snowplow going, this snow's going to turn into ice eventually. slippery. I don't know have any of you guys ever driven your car over ice and you momentarily like lose control of the car like skids in a different direction? It's terrifying, isn't it? Man, it's scary.
A few examples to demonstrate this effect. If we look all the way up north at a town like Barrow, the sun doesn't set for an entire month during the summer.
Wow.
But if we head 1,000 miles south to our hometown of Seward at the same time, we experience darkness for a few hours between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m.
Mate, the fact that there's, you can go 1,000 miles in Alaska and still be in Alaska is insane. Like, insane.
Those are a couple great examples of the summer. But when it comes to winter, it's pretty much the exact same thing except with darkness.
And that means we can move on to talking about number 13, where 70 degrees feels like 90 degrees. This interesting little bit of information, once again, has to do with Alaska's latitude and its position in relation to the sun.
Now, to help you comprehend this one, in the lower 48, during the peak hours of the day, the sun is very high in the sky, which means its rays and intensity is hitting you straight down, which is a smaller profile. But in Alaska, the sun is lower on the horizon for extended periods of the day, so it's hitting you broadside, and that literally makes 70 degrees feel like 90 degrees.
Okay.
And we can move on to number 14.
I mean, it must make a nice change though, considering I think Alaska's cold for a lot of the year. So, yeah, having a bit of heat definitely is welcome.
Things are always moving and a shaking up here.
Alaska's Pacific coast sits on the famous Ring of Fire, which in turn creates a lot of seismic activity. And that essentially means we have numerous active volcanoes and over 1,000 earthquakes per month.
1,000 a month? What? That's like 30 a day, but some of those must not be like detectable, like at least by humans. 30 earthquakes a day.
Routinely feel small shakers, but on a pretty regular basis, there are magnitude 6, 7, and even 8 quakes.
Wow.
Some of these quakes also trigger tsunami warnings or evacuations. Most are small and create hardly noticeable changes in sea level, but there's always the possibility of a serious event like 1964.
I know it's, bad, but like I would like to feel what an earthquake is like. I've never felt one before. Obviously they can be massively, catastrophic, but just to feel it, like the curiosity. Have any of you guys like felt one? Like, what's it like?
Last but not least, number 15, and it involves humans. We like labeling each other. Well, in Alaska, there are a couple unique labels: sourdough and chichaco. A chichaco is somebody who has not experienced an Alaskan winter, and a sourdough is a veteran Alaskan.
Pretty much this means you haven't earned your stripes until you have experienced the long winter. It's easy to see that glimmer in a chichaco's eyes. They're so excited about winter and they have all these
Dude, is that Santa Claus?
grand visions of all the things they want to do. Now, on the flip side, you can see the hardened look in a sourdough's eyes.
Now, in the modern world, survival may be a bit of an exaggeration, but there is no denying the winters are long, cold, and hard.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed this video and
Great video, and it does make me want to visit Alaska for sure. I've wanted to visit Alaska anyway, and it's just figuring out how the logistics of it, because it's not the only thing that kind of makes sense to me is if I was doing a Canada trip and then crossing into Alaska from there for maybe a couple of days, but because it's so huge, a couple of days is probably nowhere near enough time to explore it properly. I just have this like fascination with it. Like, I want to go to the big cities and also go like totally off grid for like a night, stay in some cabin where there's no phone connection, like nothing, just to experience what it's like to truly be like off the grid. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.